husband's second book through a critique group, and I'm doing that now, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. I also do, besides publishing consulting with my own company, I also do advocacy work. And actually on Monday, I will be doing some advocacy work that ties to my third book. I have 37 years of recovery from alcohol, and I'm in an addiction recovery network. And I probably for the last 5 years, I've spoken at the Capitol to our legislature on various bills going through the legislature. And of course, with Zoom, we're doing it on Zoom. So be thinking of me at 10:30 on Monday morning when I'm on a Zoom call with Mr. Kavanaugh out of Fountain Hills. I'm in LD 23. And it's because of my work really with my book and other advocacy work that I'm able to do that. But I really love to do that. And I also do that with my second book, which is my domestic violence story. So think about advocacy work with some of the books that you have. Okay, so there has to be a reason why you want to be in a critique group. Now, obviously it's to seek feedback. That's the most obvious reason. But it's also to really glean knowledge about other people's stories, how you can learn from the way they put their stories together. They want to glean knowledge from you on what you think they can do better. The feedback is, to me, a plus and a delta. I set up a plus delta, which is the old Ben Franklin T that we learned back in probably high school. The plus is obvious, positive. The delta is the Greek sign for change. So it's not a negative, it's our suggestions. And I put that really on the back page of the critique pages that I get from my group. And I've been in critique group, as I said, for 20 years. The group I have now, I've had for 15 years since I started my own writers club in Scottsdale. And we meet every month. And now, of course, we've been meeting on Zoom for a year. We send our pages in once a month. And then a week later, we have reviewed the pages and we meet on the Zoom call. So when I'm seeking feedback, I put questions at the end of my pages. The other women do too. We have that as part of our guidelines. Give us a few questions, you know, to prompt us on what you're really looking for. What is the knowledge you're trying to gain from us reading your paperwork? The idea of a critique group is to share your creative self. If you're a writer, you're a creative person. You might have done other creative things. You might have done something artistic. Maybe you've been a painter. Maybe you've been a sculptor. I've always had a couple women in my writers club that have been artists or are artists. So you will write better when you share your creative self. So one thing you want to do when you're in a critique group is not hold back. Give 110%. Give everything that you can. The person on the receiving end may or may not accept everything that you offer, and that's their choice. But the whole point is to make it available to them so that they can write better. And you will write better too. I can assure you that if I wouldn't have run all my books through a critique group, I don't think I would be as the writer that I am today. I know I wouldn't be. The number one thing about being in a critique group is to give encouragement and respect the other writer. We never tell the other writer that there's something wrong with the way they write or what they're writing about. That is their choice. That is who they are. We are not critiquing the person. We are not critiquing the writer. We are not critiquing the content per se. We are critiquing all the other things that go along with that. We are respecting the author. If for some reason, if for some reason the content is, let's say it's erotica, and it's just too far to one end of the spectrum or the other that doesn't fit your group, if you're a fiction or a nonfiction group and it's too extreme, that's another story. But as a rule, we seek to show respect all the way around and really encourage each other with the positive element, as I said in the very beginning. Okay, so what do we want to do when we think about choosing or creating a critique group? First of all, we want to plan it really well. We want to plan how we're going to do this. Who's going to be in the critique group with us? When do we want to meet? Where do we want to meet? And how do we want to do it? I've always had critique guidelines. Now, initially, 20 years ago, when I first started writing my first book, and I'm going to show you that book in a minute, I was in a critique group that was a takeoff from a writers club I was in Phoenix. Actually, I was in two groups. One isn't there anymore because they closed the Border store at the Biltmore. Back in the day, that was a writers club upstairs on a Saturday. And who was in that group? Well, it was a lot of different people. And it was different people. Sometimes we met at different times. Sometimes we met after the regular meeting. In the other critique group that I was in at that time, and I was feeling my way around this. I was in a critique group at the library. We met at different times. Sometimes we met at night. Sometimes we met for an hour. Sometimes we met for 4 hours. I had to figure out what worked for me. And I've even had critique groups meet in restaurants, in a back room. We ordered food. Sometimes there were 3 people there. Sometimes there were 10 people there. I set my guidelines up eventually 15 years ago when I started my writers club that there should be between 4 and 6 people in a critique group. I have found from my experience that is what works. When I've been in a critique group way back in the beginning, when there were 8 or 10 people, and we brought the pages to the meeting and we read a few pages because we had so many people, and people didn't read them in advance, it was a whole different experience. I didn't get solid, concrete feedback that I could take with me, and it needed to change. And this is how my guidelines developed and changed over time. When we met, I felt that meeting in person was right for me. We have since made the decision, like I said, 15 years ago, we meet at night. Of course, now we're meeting on Zoom. We've been doing that for a year, but initially my group, we tried meeting in restaurants, people ordering food. People would show up late. They wanted to eat at home, and then the restaurant complained because everybody didn't order food. And so I gave up on that idea. Then we started meeting in the card room at my condos. That worked really well. I dropped the group down to 4. These are just ideas for you. You can do whatever you like. The libraries usually have larger groups. They don't keep them very small because they want to accommodate as many people that support the library. So if you join a critique group through the library, or you join an online critique group of people you don't know, the numbers could be different. So those are all things that you need to check out. The guidelines that I set up basically were that this group of 4 would meet. We would meet at this time. We would turn our pages in the second Wednesday of the month. We would read them twice, critique them, have them ready, read them aloud the second time, and then we would have them available for the meeting on the third Wednesday night of the month. And we would make ourselves available for between 2 and 3 hours. If you have more people, it gets longer because everybody's allowed 10 minutes apiece. This is how I set my group up, 10 minutes apiece going around the room for each person. So if you do the math, you need that much time. I prefer a face-to-face meeting versus an online meeting. So in the beginning, I did not consider an online meeting, but there are online critique groups all over the place. So if you are not in a group where you can find your tribe to set up a critique group and become the moderator, you might reach out online to do that. I limit the people in my critique groups, and I have actually, there were 3 or 4 that have branched off from my writers club because we do them by genre. So we were able to meet face to face for many years. Of course, we all know life changed a year ago. Eventually, we may go back to a face-to-face meeting, but to be honest with you, the women like having our critique group online. Now, it's worked for us because we knew each other for a long time before we started meeting on Zoom. So the intimacy was already there. That's what I felt was lost, meeting in a critique group online with women, men or women, that I had never met before. I didn't know the moderator, and so the intimacy wasn't there. I think it's important that you have that trust of the tribe that you designate as your critique group, because what you bring to the table is important. You want to have that trust, you want to have that respect, you want to feel free, and you also need to be consistent that you're going to be there, you're going to support the group, you're not going to take it casually, that you're going to make that commitment that this is your group, I'm going to be there every week, I'm going to do this. it's a big commitment. I feel really blessed that I've had people commit to my group. I have some women that have stayed 3-4 years. They finished one book, went on and started working on another book immediately before they even launched the first book. Sometimes they launch a book, go away for a couple of years, call me up or email me and say, you know, I got my book out, I've been marketing it, I want to start another book. Do you have room in the critique group? I may or may not, but I tell them, you know, when I do, I'll let you know. And invariably, you know, life happens and they come back. But consistency is so important, that people commit, so that every month we get to know what you're writing. And it isn't just you're giving us a short story here and you're giving us a blog here, that you're building. So we get to know you and get to know your work. Okay, this was my first book. The reason I wanted to show this off is you can see on the bottom of the cover, it says Arizona Authors Literary Award winner nonfiction memoir. And that was quite a while ago, but I've redone the cover, and of course I still put it on the cover. I don't have a date on there. I don't have to put a date on there. And this was the book that I wrote about my sister who lost her life to lung cancer. And it's really about siblings, especially my relationship with my sister. Our siblings are our first relationships. And I did a lot of grief workshops with this. But this book went through a critique group that was a large critique group. A lot of people read different chapters. And if I had to do it over again, I would have had it in a smaller group. Some people did better with the story than others because of the grief. I think if it was in a smaller group of maybe women that knew me better, or just people, men or women that knew me better, it might have had a little bit more feedback. It's just my take on it. But I did run it through a critique group for over a year, which was very helpful. So this is the new cover that came out last year. Of course, my promotion now, of course, is all online, and none of those events that we love to do with the public are going to happen for a while. Okay, this is a fun little picture. We want to group it neatly. I don't even know if neatly is a word, but I didn't look it up to see if it was. I just decided I liked that word. And it seemed to fit the picture. So you have a choice. Do you want an open group, a closed group, a general or genre-based group? Now, I've touched on these a little bit, but it's important that you make these decisions. You don't just jump into any group. If you want an open group, which is anybody joins in, which I did in the beginning, and I'm glad that I did it because I learned a lot about other types of writing besides nonfiction, which is what I do. So if you have an open group, you have fiction, nonfiction, you might have poetry, you might have children's books. But what I found as time went on was that I needed to focus on the genre that was of interest to me and where I was writing. So after a couple of years, I knew that I was going to be writing in the nonfiction group. That's what I read, that's what I loved, that's what I was writing. So I moved on to a closed group. And then the camaraderie started to build, and I started making that group smaller, because when I first moved on to that group, I had my writers club and I allowed 6 or 8 women into the group. So we had fiction and nonfiction, and we had memoir and nonfiction. Of course, memoir is nonfiction, but what I mean is how-to books, that type of thing, and some business books, of that type. And that worked much better. And then I started closing in, and if somebody dropped out of the group, I didn't replace them, and I got it down to 4 people. So that's your decision in the very beginning, is what will work for you, or do you want to feel both out and then know where you place yourself? But I firmly believe that if you are in a critique group with your genre, you're going to learn so much more about your genre, about the people that write in your genre, and you're going to be able to give better feedback. If you aren't somebody that reads memoir or nonfiction, and you love mystery, you love cozy mysteries, you love crime, you love thrillers, that's your tribe. That's where you should be. So you can toss that around. Nothing's carved in stone. Okay, so how do we make it happen? Well, I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but we want to search and match. Let's say you're the one that's going to create the group. Okay, if you're the one that's going to create the group, let's say you've tried to find a critique group to fit you and you can't. So, you know what they say, if you can't find the book you want, you write it. Well, it's kind of the same thing with the critique group. If you can't find the critique group, the tribe that fits you, then create it. So you're going to search and match, join some writers groups, find people that want what you want. And that's what's happened in my writers group. At least 3 or 4 critique groups have branched off from my main writers club I've had for 15 years. You can always go online and search around. You could put blurbs on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter, and say, you know, I live in, well, for myself, I live in Scottsdale, Arizona. I write memoir. I'm looking for a couple more women to jump into my memoir writing critique group. This is when we meet. This is what we do. Text me. I'll send you the guidelines, blah, blah, blah. Maybe the libraries would let you post information that you're searching to do that. Maybe they'll let you use their facilities. Maybe they'll let you take over a critique group they already have. There are probably libraries here in the Valley that would love to have somebody take over their critique groups or start one with the library. Then you've got location, you've got access to their newsletter to advertise for you. You have access to their, you know, their customers. I don't know if they, since it's nonprofit, I don't know if they call us customers if we have a library card, but whoever we are, clients, readers. So that might be a way to go to get started. So think about how you can search and match and start creating your group. You can also advertise and promote anywhere in your own network. If you have a blog, a website, social media, take advantage of social media. You know, Facebook, Instagram, they all, you know, they get a bad rap. Twitter gets a bad rap. I love them. I have been on social media since it started. I've had email, I've had websites, everything for, I think it's going on 25 years. I don't honestly know, I've lost track. But social media, whenever they, just pick about 4 of them. You know, there's way too much out there. I kind of use the old 4 and hope they don't go away, you know, that they don't send Zuckerberg to prison and we don't have Facebook anymore or whatever, you know. I mean, take advantage of them to promote what you're doing and explore your shared direction. You should interview the people that are coming to your critique group. Talk to them, find out what they want. When somebody joins my writers group, I'll give you a good example. And they tell me, well, I hear you, you know, they'll come up to me and say, I know you write memoir and nonfiction. Well, so do I, and I'd love to be in your critique group. When can I do this? Well, I get to know them better. I don't just say, oh, great, come on down. I want to know what they write, what they have written, what their commitment is, what their direction is, what their goals are, let them know what the goals are of our group. Now, everybody that comes to my critique group does not have to publish their book within a year after they leave the critique group, which might take that long. They might need a developmental editor. They might need to come up with the money if they're going to independently publish, to do the cover and everything. They might need time to find an agent. They don't have to have that goal. What the goal that we want them to have is that they're going to finish their manuscript within the critique group, unless life takes a turn. And we all know things happen. If we haven't learned that in the last year, we'll never learn it. So we know that life happens, but we want to explore the direction that these people are going with their writing. I'll ask somebody to come into my critique group that says, well, I'm thinking about writing a memoir. Can I just come and sit in for a while? Well, that doesn't work, because we practice the attitude that grandma used to have. You know, you get what you give out, what goes around comes around. So we expect if somebody's sitting in our critique group, they have something to offer. They're going to give feedback. They're going to offer their pages, and we're going to offer our critique in return. So we need shared goals and shared direction with the people that come into our group. Okay, so the workable guidelines, write out the rules. Remember, I said I'll give you just a quick synopsis. Anybody wants a copy of my critique guidelines, send me an email. I can put the email in my chat. You know, I would be happy to send it to you. Basically, the rules say that if you are in my critique group, you know that the second Wednesday of the month pages are due. preferably by 6 o'clock, but if you run late, it's okay. Sometimes life happens, you turn it in Thursday morning, but that is the goal. A week later, we meet on Zoom. When I get my ladies' pages, and I'll get them from 3 other gals, what I do is I immediately read them the first time within 2 days. I get them on Wednesday night. I try to read them by Friday. Then I let them sit for a day or so. And then at the latest by Monday, I go back and I read them aloud. Now I read them for all kinds of things, and I'm looking for all kinds of things. I'm answering their questions. I'm doing my plus delta, my positive, and my suggestions, but always practicing diplomacy, always remembering that I need to honor what they've written and to do the best that I can. I don't just slide through them. I don't decide the day of the critique group that I'm going to read through them once. That is not the way it's done. This is a two-part process, and that's part of the rules. Another part of the rules is we start on time. Everybody, as I said earlier, is allowed 10 minutes. So when it's my turn to be critiqued, the other 3 gals take their 10 minutes to tell me what they've done, what's on the paper, and then they're going to either mail the pages to me or they're going to email them, scan them, however they're going to get them back to me. They are not interrupted, not by anybody else in the group or by me. I keep my little mouth shut until all 3 of these other women have presented. Then I get my chance to tell them to comment on what they said, and I take about 10 minutes. Then we go on to the next person. And of course, everything, as I said, is very respectful. Our moderator is established. Because it's my group, I'm the moderator. Nobody has ever said, oh, I want to be the moderator. I want to do the timer on my phone and make sure we stay on task. It's a simple job. Nobody has said, oh, I want to do it this week. If they did, they could. But I just end up being the moderator. I'm the one that sends out the Zoom link, and there you go. I mentioned earlier already about publication goals. If they have a publication goal and they have a deadline, and there's a month or 2 where they want to double up on their pages, if everybody agrees to it, we do it. Let's say they have a December deadline and we're in August, and they know that 12 pages a month isn't going to get them to that goal. They need to double up because they're not going to make that goal. Then if everybody agrees to double up on their pages and get them on track, we do that. But it's a joint commitment, and whatever their publication goals, we try to adapt. Okay, this is the second book that I wrote, and I wrote this through a critique group. And the reason I throw this out, and that picture was from the Tucson Festival of Books from 2 years ago. There was no festival last year. There is a festival this year online, TucsonFestivalofBooks.org. There is an exhibitors marketplace. Please go there. I'm going to have some things under Brooks Goldman Publishing. They're trying to do the best they can. I think they'll do a great job online for the festival. This is a topic about love addiction and domestic violence. This is my story. This is not down nitty gritty to the point of upsetting people to where they couldn't read the story. That is not the story. If you write a story, as I said, maybe you've got some erotic things in it or something that's unnerving for somebody in your group, you need to prepare them. I did not have anybody in my critique group tell me that they no longer wanted to read my pages with this book, because the book it's inspiring, it's upbeat, so forth. So there might come a time when there's something in a book that is unnerving. And we had that one time about 5 years ago with somebody. And it was just the way that it was written. She wasn't ready to write this story. It was a story about her daughter. And it's a long story, and it's her story. But sometimes people aren't ready to write their story. They're too close to it, and they can't write it with the right perspective, to stand back and write it with the right perspective because they've been too close to it. Maybe they should write it, fictionalize it. It'll be easier to absorb the story as a fiction. So that can happen sometimes in a critique group, but it's pretty rare. It's pretty rare if you've picked your tribe correctly. Okay, so how do we accept the guidelines that are for our group? Well, first of all, we've decided on the size and the genre, right? We've talked about that already, about preparing our pages. And I try to prepare the pages. As I said, I'm helping my husband now. This past year, I've been helping my husband with his second book. He'll be 86. He is 86. He'll be 87 in December. Writing his second book. You're never too old to write books. But it's important. He has handwritten his books like Hemingway, on notebooks. And he's redone them, 3-4 times. Then he gives them to me. I type them. Then I go over them a couple of times. And he takes a look at it, and then we consider them polished pages to go to their critique group. And yes, they find many things, make many suggestions, and they come back to us. And then I take all their suggestions, put them into the pages. My husband looks at them, and we try to polish them up a couple more times to get everything ready so that hopefully at the end of this year, they will go to an editor. So preparation and polishing pages is critical before you take them send them to your critique group. Your critique group is not there to clean up your first draft or your second draft or your third draft. And I think that's important for people to understand. They are professionals. They are there to look at pretty quality pages. And I can guarantee you, I consider myself a pretty darn good writer. I think my husband is too. And the critique group, we all know it takes a lot of eyes on the page to get it ready for the public. And they find all kinds of things. And I'm not offended by that. I don't think I've read a book yet that I haven't found an error that hasn't had a professional editor. It's pretty rare. It's life, nobody's perfect. And I look forward to my critique meetings. I think it's really important that when you critique for somebody else, that you read the pages twice. I've said this a couple times, but it's so important. And the second time, excuse me, read them out loud. A lot of you read your pages out loud. A lot of you know that when your manuscript is finished, you should read the whole manuscript out loud, front to back. But each individual chapter that chapter that you do for somebody in your critique group and your own chapter before it goes to your critique group should be read out loud. There's something magical about reading out loud, reading to yourself. Now, somebody said the other day in my critique group that there is a program on Word that will read to you. I think if somebody read to me, I'd be falling asleep. I mean, like you did when you were a little girl, your mother started reading to you and your fell over. So I don't think I could have Word, computer reading to me, even my own work or somebody else's. But so investigate that. If you would like to have Word read to you, and if you can't find it, I'll tell you who uses it and she'll help you find it. I've already told you about the timed feedback. When you accept the guidelines, you don't have to do the 10-minute deal like we do. You might want to set it up differently for yourself if you have a larger group. It's just what's worked for me over many, many years. I can't say this enough. You're going to critique the writing, not the writer. These people will become your trusted friends. They have to be your trusted friends. You're bearing your soul to them before it ever gets published, because you might be telling them to take something out, add something in. You might put something in there that shouldn't be there. You're building a trust with them, but you are not there to criticize the writer as a person. Always remember when you go to your critique group that you as the author have an opportunity to respond to anything, not to justify what you did, but to explain and clarify. There's a big difference in the author response as you're explaining and clarifying, and also that you are really giving an opportunity for them to understand why you did what you did. Okay. Remember, it's a subjective style. We're going to be impartial. Always think about yourself as like the impartial jury, That's really who you are when you're in a critique group. There might be solutions to the structure of the book. There are a lot of things that you're going to critique. I mean, the structure of the book, maybe the way it's set up could be set up better. But give concrete suggestions. Don't just say, well, the way the book's laid out, it just doesn't work for me. That isn't enough. You need to come up with something concrete. Maybe the book should be vignettes, like my husband's book. Maybe the book should be set up in chronological order. If it's a memoir, it doesn't have to be that way. If it's fiction, it doesn't have to be that way. You can boom, you can murder somebody in the first chapter, or you can murder them 6 chapters in. So be very concrete in your solutions. You can help in the development, developing the characters, suggesting maybe showcase this character more, take this character out. The book will develop more with less characters. You don't want to have so many people in a memoir or a fiction, I'm sure, at least that's my experience, where you have to have a list of 25 people and explain who they are on the back of the book. I know that's done. But I think I'm a smart girl, and I don't want to have to do that. I don't want to flip to the back of the book and try to remember everybody. But that's, that is your choice. But help in the development of the book by saying, this is better out of here, or this is better 6 chapters in, but be specific. And come up with some ideas that strengthen the pages. And by being unbiased, just try not to be biased about how you feel about the topic, how you feel about the characters. They might not be a character that you would use. They might not be people you would have ever associated with. But try to have an idea that will strengthen what's happening without throwing your own bias in there. And if you're in a genre that you read and write, the bias will probably intervene, or not so much. Okay, so let's check it twice. What other things are we going to be looking for when we're critiquing? We already talked about, are the characters developed? Are they believable? Can we see them? Can we visualize them? Do we want to know more about them? One of the things I look for, are the paragraphs too long? I learned a long time ago, and I don't know, I went to a little school in the woods, but I learned that paragraphs, if you take a breath and you change course a little bit, it's probably another paragraph. Now that's pretty basic, but I remember Mrs. Ellis saying that, in school. Sentences. I'm a short sentence person, not a long sentence person. Some people are. I like staccato. I like shorter sentences. Gets my attention, keeps me awake when I'm reading. It's your choice. Sometimes some people have long paragraphs and long sentences, and I'm like, your choice. Maybe it works. It depends on what's going on. There should be some action. There should be something going on in every chapter, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Why write the chapter if there isn't something going on? Dialogue. Fiction, nonfiction, you can have dialogue. I love dialogue. I didn't put dialogue in my first book. I was learning, and as I said, I wasn't in as developed a critique group as I am now. The ladies that are in my critique group now would have never let me get away with it. I still like my first book very much, but the second and third book have dialogue as far as memoir. And you can do that with memoir because you remember most of what happened because you were there. It's your experience. And you're not embellishing the dialogue, you're just bringing it to light. The same with the scenes. Of course, with fiction, you can pretty much do what you want. And then if you decide to fictionalize your what maybe started out as a memoir, then have at it. The dialogue's really important, and having scenes that bring the reader into the scene is critical. So this is what you're looking for when you're critiquing somebody's work. And then you're obviously looking for grammar, punctuation, tense. Tense to me is sometimes hard to catch. I catch it better when I read it the second time aloud. Grammar and punctuation, I cheat. I have editor on my Word software, so I kind of cheat and let editor help me with that. Some of it's glaring, but usually if it's a polished piece, it's not easy to catch it. And another one that I really look for is redundancies and repeats. Repeating the same word 3 times in a paragraph, 4 times, 5 times. People have their pet words. Or repeating the same word twice in a sentence. I'm always grabbing my phone and asking the thesaurus for synonyms. Sometimes you need to do that, to just flush it out a little bit. There should always be a hook and an arc. Now, you're not going to have the whole manuscript in front of you every month, But if you're in the critique group for a couple of years and they are too, then you're going to get the whole story. And eventually you're going to see where the arc of the whole story is. But each chapter is probably going to have a hook and an arc somewhere. And the important thing is, when I look for where the chapter began and where does it circle around at the end, kind of, either bring you to a teaser or tie it up, or depends on what you like to look for. What I have found in the critique room is everybody looks for something different. Everybody has their little pet things that, I just see it over and over. And I love the gals that are on my critique group, but they have their little pet things. And I know I do too, that they're the first things that they look for. And that's terrific because we all bring something different to the table. Okay, this is my third book. And this gal, since earlier we were talking, Wayne and I were talking about the Upper Peninsula, Michigan, where I was born. Actually, I lived 50 miles south of the Canadian border. What I was born in the oldest city in Michigan, Sault Ste. Marie, on the Canadian border. And this lady was born there too, and was a therapist there and worked with a lot of people in recovery. So this picture was taken in Prescott at the library. And she, anyway, sat in the front row and smiled the whole time. So you love those people at your workshop, Anyway, she came up to me afterwards and told me who she was. And so I always have her smiling face when I show off this book. This book went through a critique group also. And of course, it's about my alcoholism and my recovery and a lot of my service work and things that I've done, a lot about forgiveness and gratitude. And it worked with my critique group because the women that went through this book with me over about at least a year and a half, because I think there are about 16 chapters in this book. This book's a little bit bigger. It's about 250 pages. They knew me really well. They were comfortable with the topic. I didn't go down a path that was offensive to them or where they didn't want to go. So it worked really well. And then of course it got polished up and then went on to an editor. I am a firm believer. I don't care if you're in a critique group. I don't care if you have a degree in English. If Aunt Mary has a degree in English and she's your proofreader, you need to have an editor. I love editors. I mean, that's why God made editors, to help us. And I just would never take a book from a critique group and put it up on Amazon. And if you did that, don't tell me it. I mean, I'd forgive you, but don't tell me. Okay, the final analysis. So the final analysis when you're critiquing is what, and if you want to put some comments at the end, this is what I do with my plus delta. What I love about it goes in the plus column. What was the one thing I loved about that chapter? That goes in the plus column. What causes me concern? That goes in the delta column. And there's probably one thing that caused me concern about their chapter. So that goes in the delta side. What has room for improvement? You notice I said improvement, not what needs to be thrown in the trash. That would be the wrong thing, wouldn't it? What has room for improvement? Now they might decide that they do want to throw it in the trash, that particular section of that chapter. But let's give them the opportunity to improve it. So what has room for improvement? And I don't just give them 3 words. I try to give them a phrase anyway, and refer it back to page, the paragraph number, be specific. What doesn't flow well? There's probably something in everybody's chapter that comes through the critique group that doesn't flow well. It might just be one sentence. Now, some of the ladies are good writers. We have a gal in my critique group who has a PhD in education, and trust me, if you can write a doctoral thesis, you're a pretty darn good writer. So once in a while, something doesn't flow well in her pages. But we all give her a lot of feedback because it's a whole different kind of writing. So the reason I tell you about her is don't be intimidated by who is in your critique group. Most people that start out with a writing career have been in a whole different world. I was in the business world, and then I took a creative writing 200 level class at Phoenix College 20 years ago after I had a master's degree in business. So don't be intimidated by who's in your class. We all start at the same point when we first start our writing career, if it's not in our realm that we've lived in. And the last thing I look at is what is puzzling me. And that goes in the Delta side also. What is it that just puzzles me about the chapter? What is it that seems odd? And it might be something small, like, somebody described the car or the dress or the person differently than they did on the last page. And they didn't even realize they did it. It might be something, but why did they do that? Why are they describing them differently? Okay, so that's where we're at, and we're ready for questions. One thing I want to throw out to you very quickly, and then we'll open it up to everybody that's here. If you're interested in any of my books, I would love to sign a book for you. I always offer my books at $10 a piece. I will sign them and mail them to you, and you can text me. There's my text number. I'll put it in the chat, or you can send me an email, and I'll do that. Otherwise, the books are $12.95 and $14.95 on Amazon, and then you would pay postage on top of that. So however they do it. But anyway, I would love to do that for any of you if you're interested in my books. So I'm going to stop the share. So like I said, my email's there, my website, text message, but I'll put some of that in the chat. And now I want to hear your questions. So there we are.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay. Does it have to be for books? Let's say I have a killer essay that I want to submit to the Arizona Authors Contest.
Okay, as long as your critique group is willing to work with that, there's no reason not to. And I recently had the gal in my critique group who finished her memoir, is now writing a business book, is also submitting articles to different online sites that look for business articles. And this one happened to be national, and there's a possible for a podcast. I mean, the whole thing. And she did that. It was about 8 pages. And she alerted us ahead of time and said, this is what I want to submit this week. Will you look at it? And of course we would. She's been in the critique group for over 3 years. So as long as your group agrees to it, absolutely. Absolutely. And every once in a while, around the holidays, I've done it. A couple other people have done it. We've tagged on our holiday letter or some extra little thing. One thing we don't tag on is something like poetry. And the only reason I say that is, and I love poetry and I've written it like for family things, is just because it's so personal. And really, it's very hard to edit poetry. You really can't. I mean, poetry is what it is, it's just so personal. So, but answer your question, Jane, definitely. If your critique group's good with it, then absolutely. Who else has a question? Who's in a critique group and you want to tell us about your critique group if you don't have a question? Is anybody in a critique group now, or you've been in one? Carolyn, tell us about the group that you're in, or were you in one in Illinois or here? Or?
Yes, I'm in one in Illinois. I would like to be in one here also. And we kept it at 4. We tried 5 different times. And for our group, we kept it at 4, like you suggested. And we were comfortable with each other. We meet once a month and we email our stories ahead of time, or our chapters, or And at first we started out being real critical. And again, I noticed that I like what you're doing there. And it just, it just wasn't working. So now we're more, what do I want to say, kinder, or that sort of thing. So we've learned in the process. We were the first critique group in our area. And we had gone to a books signing and a lecture at the university. And we were all sitting there having lunch, or some of us, the first 3 of us. And we said, we need a critique group. And we're looking at each other, and somebody said, well, let's do it. So we did. We've been together probably 10 years. We've lost some, that's moved away. And then we lost one because her work got involved too much. She worked crisis. And so we keep it at 4 though, so. And I've
Mhm.
learned so much from this group out here, but I would like to have a critique group out here also.
And we'll talk about that because Carolyn's in my writers club, and we'll talk about that. I'll find out from the other group, since we're not meeting face to face. I'm not sure how the other critique groups are doing, and we'll figure out where we can find a place for you.
Okay.
Oh, definitely, we'll do that. And you said something, reiterated something I said, but it's so critical is not to, be so hard on people right out of the chute. I don't know many of you were in Toastmasters, but that's one of the first things you learn in Toastmasters is, you tell people the good things about their speech, or, and it's the same thing with the pages is, that's the same thing with the plus delta, the Ben Franklin T, give them the pluses first. I mean, they're always pluses to everybody's writing, and it's diplomacy. I mean, there's a nice way to tell people, you need to work, you need to work on this darn thing, but you don't have to quite, say you need to work on this darn thing, even though that's what you're thinking is good grief that they, why did they send this to us, Anyway, so who else wants to comment? Who else has been in a critique group? We have a question. Wayne, go ahead.
What stage is the most productive or best stage to put a manuscript in the hands of a critique group?
Well, I think my experience has been I've done it with chapter by chapter, because so if your manuscript does not have to be finished. If you've done 2 or 3 chapters and you're ready to have somebody else's eyes look at it, then we do 1 chapter a month. Now, like I said, if somebody's on a deadline and they want to submit 2 chapters and they're not big, long chapters, and we can work it out. Like we have a gal who's right now in my group who submitted 2 chapters last month, which was 16 pages. Normally we say 10 to 12 pages, but she is on a deadline because she is actually writing a memoir for someone else in our group who English is her second language. So she's helping her as a ghostwriter. And we're accepting 2 chapters a month for her, but we all know each other and we understand the bilingual situation and the deadline and all of that. But I wouldn't wait until your manuscript is done, because you won't give that to the critique group. You'll give them probably, like I said, a chapter at a time. Some critique groups meet twice a month. But the women that have come through my critique group, me included, twice a month was too much. We felt once a month was a good meeting schedule. Now you might find a group out in where you live. I know you live out Glendale, Peoria, out west side, right? And you might find a group somewhere that would be willing to, if you've got a manuscript finished or half finished and you want to move along a little faster, if you can find 2 or 3 people that want to meet twice a month, that would help you if you're way down the road on that manuscript.
I would like to suggest, Wayne, this is true for you and true for anybody else that's a member. I suggest that you write up what you want. If you would like to have a group of 4 or 5 or however many, like if you want to write a memoir or if you want to write historical fiction, just do a little blurb where you describe what you're looking for and put it as a free ad in the newsletter. Then there might be other authors in our membership. We have created critique groups like that in the past.
That's a good idea. I like that.
And I'll send you my guidelines, my critique guidelines, Wayne, and then you can look at, and Jane, you wanted them also, didn't you? Okay, is there anybody?
That too, Tricia.
Okay, so.
You can send them to me, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, Susan, okay.
Yes, thank you.
I'm gonna put my, I don't have everybody's email, so I'm gonna put my email, Christine, I'll put my email in the chat for you, and then you can email me and remind me that you want them also.
And Patricia, you can send that to Kathleen and she will put it in the newsletter.
Okay.
I think that would be a very good use of your materials. So the
Okay,
other members will get to see it.
righty. Okay, so go ahead. Somebody has a question or a comment? Anybody else? It's been in a critique group. Maybe you're not in one now, or
I don't think my mic is on now. You know, the technology is so wild that you keep learning all the time with this. I really appreciate being able to be here. Thank you so very much for doing this, Toby and Patricia. It's very, very interesting. I had a lot of questions when you were talking, and I think that you have a fascinating perspective, and I'm excited to get your book. I'd like you to send me a copy of the recovery book that you have. And I have been on a recovery trip myself, and
congratulations.
thank you. And I love writers. And, you know, there's a special place in my heart for those people that, you know, you want to give of yourself to other people. And, you know, I think what I got from you is that compassion is probably the most important thing in a critique group, is that you're there really to support. You know, you got to kind of get down a little bit. Okay. Could you talk about that a little bit, about your experience with getting along with other people and not being combative?
That's really important, because what happens is, like Carolyn said in the beginning of her group, and I've seen it even with my group, where people, you know, it's easy to start feeling like you're attacking, and then you might have somebody in the group will pop up and say, well, I'm not going to be so hard on you as the others were. Well, maybe we weren't hard on them. They don't understand maybe that we were just presenting our view on what needs to be done on the pages, because we're critiquing. You know, there's a line between attacking and critiquing, and you know, there's no point in doing it if all you're going to do is say, oh, everything was wonderful. I just love your work. Everything's wonderful. You did a great job. You got to get this out. This book needs to be heard by people. That does me no good. That does me no good. And I've said that when I've turned pages in. Please don't tell me you love my writing. And, you know, and I mean, I want you to love my writing, but I want you to tell me what's wrong with it and what I need to improve it. So yes, it is about getting along with people. You have different personalities, but in some ways you don't. If you're in a common genre, you have some commonality with the other people. And if you keep it to a smaller group, you have more opportunity to get to know each other. Now, when we met in person, I would try to get everybody to come at 5:45 so we could have a little chit chat. We still do a little chit chat online, but everybody, you know, is kind of zoomed out, so we don't do as much chit chat online. But to stay connected as humans. And then at the end of the year, we would go out to lunch together around the holidays, you know, to just have a chance to just talk to each other. And what are we going to do next year? And this was a great year, and look who accomplished this, or who finished their manuscript, or whatever. And just, you know, celebrated the year. So to answer your question, yeah, you really have to have some compassion for other people that aren't maybe where you are. You know, now that I'm helping my husband with his second book, and I've been through a critique group with 4 books, I'm at a different place than that person that comes to my group working on their first book. And I understand that. You know, I understand that. I try to remind myself of that every time I read their work. And, you know, yeah, you're right. You have to put yourself in other people's shoes when you're in that group. And, you know, just like I said, you have to find your tribe that you can trust and respect the other people. But they also have to be willing to, you know, have a little bit of, not have thin skin to the point where you can't offer anything to them either. You know, it's a two-way street. I mean, you know, they have to be willing to allow you to do what you are supposed to be doing in critiquing their work. So you'll find that where it works. And, you know, it takes time. It's like any other relationships, you know, but it does take time. And thanks for your comment. And we'll definitely connect later on the thanks for
Thank
sharing.
you.
Okay. Who else would like to tell us about? There's plenty of time if there's anybody else that wants to ask a question or make a comment about critiquing other people's work. You have your hand up there, Jane? Anybody have their hand on the participant?
No, I was turning off my chat window.
Oh, okay. Okay. You can wave if you want to.
Well, one thing I will say, if it's all right, the first critique group I was ever in, I was in my 20s, and I came home and cried all night because of how much they hated my work. And I refused to go to a critique group again. And it was like, I was in my late 30s before I ever went back. And I'm glad I did go back because it was so useful. And I think that when people are new, when they're new writers and they're you know, just starting out, I think they're much more sensitive towards their babies than when they get older and they have a lot of books under their belt and people don't like their work. They go, who cares, you know? But I think when you're first starting out, you're much more sensitive towards harsh criticism.
Oh, I
Just
think
an
so.
observation.
Yeah. I think so too. I think so too. And I've had people ask me, well, have you had anybody in your book retaliate, or are you worried about what people think, or what does your family think? Well, you know, what my family thinks is the least of it, because they're going to buy a book anyway, or I'm going to give them one and hope they read it. But you know, but the thing is, it's not that they're not my market really. You know, most of the time the books we write are family. Even if you write memoir, sometimes they're not your market. You know, so it's the big picture, I guess, is what I usually tell people. It's the big picture. You know in your heart you're going down the right path. But you're right, when you're younger, you know, and I think 25 years ago when I started in that other critique group, I would hardly say anything. I was so intimidated by the other people in the room, and you know, it takes time, and but I don't know. I guess it just plugs along, and there's so many wonderful experiences you can have in a critique group and you obviously have, and that's wonderful. Very exciting.
Hey, I have another question in that regard. You have a critique group and they've really helped you out and they really sent you great ideas, and now you've got a killer publication. What about acknowledgments? Do you put them in your acknowledgments for all their help?
I do. I'll look very quickly in my book here. When I do acknowledgments, I try to cover, you know, the most people that I mean, the people that should be in there. And I think this one, I got the acknowledgments in the back, but I do list my critique group. I don't necessarily list their names, but I do, you know, I maybe list my writers club that supported me, my husband, my critique group, the editor, and I have it right here. Many thanks go to my critique group women who spent countless hours over the past several years giving me feedback on these pages. Oh, I did list their names in this book, my last one. Sherry Kiesling, Kitty Kessler, Shannon Tyree, and Suzanne Diamond. And these were the gals. I took them to Sanctuary for lunch at the end of the book around the holidays. I'm truly grateful to their friendship and encouragement. They helped me polish the manuscript and divine my purpose for the book. These women were always patient while challenging me to be more concise with my words. So I have, you know, about a page and a half of acknowledgments in there. That's the third. No, I have a page, and that's the third paragraph. So I think it's important if you're going to acknowledge your editor. I acknowledge my husband as a proofreader. You know, I acknowledge some other friends that I interviewed for this particular, you know, this particular book. Oh, definitely. Because those women are still in my life now. even if they aren't. I think it's important because people love to see their name in print. And then they might, just tell more people, well, look at this book. I helped her critique this book and take a little credit for it. Well, lucky me, so why not acknowledge people that helped you? So anyway, and they're great gals, by the way. Okay. Anybody else? Any questions?
I just like to thank you for the time that you spent. I got 4 pages of notes here. I'm not sure how well I'm going to be able to read them. So I appreciate the information you're going to say.
I think you would be a great, because you've been in education, you would be a good person to moderate a group. I know you have a lot of balls in the air, and that's something you'd have to acknowledge personally, but I would suggest to you maybe contacting, I'm not familiar with the library in Peoria. I've done work with the library in Glendale, but I would imagine it's sort of the same idea. They might have a critique group that they might be looking for a moderator or a leader. And, and you might be able to just step in and kind of take it over or lead it for a while. And, but you'd have to decide if it fits you and if you could, break it up into more than one group, but I guess my feeling with doing this was to get people to think about even developing their own group that fits them. That's really the key. That's really when I found my place in a critique group, was when, I created one that fit me and didn't try to, fit into a square.
Yeah, well, I appreciate what you presented.
Oh, well, you're very welcome.
To me, I know that.
You're very welcome. It's important. It's really important. In most conferences that I've been to, most speakers I've heard, and many of you have been to conferences too, they'll talk about joining a writers club, joining a critique group. It's pretty common information. You might not get this much detail, but it's pretty common. Anybody else have anything?
I have a question.
Yeah, Carolyn, go ahead.
You were talking about writing that not be too horrible and to kind of waltz around that, but what if it is horrible?
Well, then you'll get a lot of feedback. And if you're a new writer, or if that's a good question. I'm trying to think when I've had that.
Let me clarify this.
Have you had that experience with somebody in your group?
Yeah,
I don't know, but you go.
Writing is horrible. I mean, the story is of a horrible event. And you was talking about waltzing around on that.
Well, it's a decision that your group would make as to whether you want to deal with that story. That's why I like to vet the people that come into the group. I try to find out what is the gist of their story. What are they going to write about? So that I can let the other members of the group know, that this is what I'm writing about, just like with my own stories, and with other people, this is what they're writing about. Are you good with this? Because especially when we write memoir, I mean, it's all over the board, but fiction can be the same way. I mean, these thrillers and horror and crime. So I try to alert them and say, this is the person, this is what they're writing, this is where it's going to lead to. It might be more than what they said it was, but we try to piecemeal it along. I only had one experience, and actually I'm Catholic. It's kind of funny. It involved the Catholic Church, not with my work, but this is when I had about 6 or 8 people in the group. And one person was writing about the church from her involvement with all kinds of missions that she'd done. And, she was part of one side of her view of the church, really a huge commitment beyond what most of us have ever done with any church. And then the other person was very much had negative experiences and was very much to the other side of her view of the church. Well, you know, they clashed. They just clashed, and one of them had to go, and I knew it, and it ended up that you know, both of them decided to drop out of the group. I tried to talk one of them into staying, but actually the person that left first really shouldn't have been the one to leave first, and it was unfortunate, you know. Not that people shouldn't write about religion and politics just because you can't talk about it at the dining room table. I mean, those are topics that sell. And but it was unfortunate, you know. They just could not. They were critical of the writer. That's what happened. They were critical of the writer's views. They could not see the forest for the trees, and that's an old cliche, but it's a fact. So that was unfortunate, and it wasn't. It just, unfortunately, we had 6 or 8 people in the group at that time. So when the 2 of them dropped out of the critique group, I don't remember what one of them, I know she found a coach to help her write the book, a personal coach to help her with it. The other one, I don't recall what she finally did with her writing. But they both dropped out eventually. And yeah, it was quite an experience, but they, yeah, and then in 15 years, that's not too bad, you know, to have that. The only memory I have of a couple people really clashing. So, yeah, you never know what's going to be on the page.
We had a writer in Illinois who wrote thriller, murder, and she asked me to read it, which I did. And I mean, it was detailed on the murder, every little body part that was slashed or hit. And I got into her characters because they were so visual. But a lot of people in the writers group will not read her book, and she has won awards with it. And I can see why, from my point of view, but it was pretty visual, pretty bad.
Yeah, I can imagine. And, you know, those kinds of stories, I mean, if you look at even PBS, and I'm a PBS junkie, I mean, the murder mysteries they're all the time. They're popular, you know, and the ones that come on at 10 o'clock are even more popular, you know, because they're more gory than the other ones, you know. You know, I like Father Brown myself. They're not too gory.
Yeah.
And I would like to also say thank you for all your training and what all you've done. And I am so appreciative. You don't know how appreciative I am.
Oh, well, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. I'm glad you joined us from afar and from here. And I'm just so grateful we have Zoom. So when people can't come back to Arizona, we can still connect. What would we have done without? I don't know who invented Zoom, but they're really a special person in my thinking. But anyway, so do we have anybody else? Anybody at all? Anything?
I'll just say that one of the critique groups that I tried for just a while, and I loved the people, and it was very small, but they were all writing fiction, and I just didn't care. I'm more into the nonfiction, and that's what I tend to read. So that's why I kind of queried at one point about your group, Patricia, because I like the idea of the genre, you know, having that in common, because I love to hear other people's stories, their true stories. So I would be more inclined, but my problem is I haven't been writing steadily enough. But yeah, I think that would be a better fit whenever I really gear up to write. To be in a genre group, yeah.
I just recently did my memoir writing workshop. I'm going to do it again here in a few weeks on April 6th, actually, if any of you are writing memoir. But 3 celebrities have just come out with their memoir. And I try to remember to always say, you know, if you're thinking about a memoir, you better write it now, because every time you turn around, there's another celebrity writing a memoir. Cindy McCain and, you know, Jamie Curtis and but Jamie, you know, I mean, I forget who the other one was. There's another one that just popped up. I mean, it's like, you know, about every 30 days, you know, we can't let them take over the memoir category. You know, it's that they've already taken over children's books. Look how many children's books have been written by, you know, Jamie Lee Curtis is another one. You know, now she's writing a memoir. I mean, who does she think she is? You know, I love her though. And she's been married the same husband for 40 years. So you know, she's doing
Wow.
something right. Yeah, she's been sober about 25 years. So I love Jamie. Lived in the same house for like 40 years. So she's not typical Hollywood. So I'll give a little plug to Jamie Lee. But anyway, but you know, we can't let them take over. You know, they try. There's some other celebrity that's writing the memoir. I forget what it was the other day. I keep writing it. I'm like, oh my God, these people. Well, they're not really writing them. You know, I don't know who helped them write. Let's put it that way. That's all right. If you need help, get help. That's what I say. There are definitely people that'll help you write your books. And that's something, just a quick comment on that, and then maybe we'll wrap it up, and maybe Jane or Kathleen have a comment for the Arizona authors. But I mentioned that there's a gal in my critique group who's writing this book as a ghostwriter for somebody in the Writers Club who's bilingual. And so she's not only on the deadline with her, and it's tied to something within their family, but also she has to meet with her on, she meets with her on Sunday so that she can interview her and get ready to start working on the pages for the next month. So, I mean, they're really on a schedule. Plus, they both work full time. They're younger. They're like, you know, I mean, they could be my kids, you know, and they work full time and they do this. Yeah, they're just amazing. But anyway, what's really interesting about it is that, you know, that's a solid commitment. That's a solid commitment. So I have to postmark my pages back to her in an envelope for sure on Thursday morning. So she gets it by Friday or Saturday and meets with this gal. And the other gals do the same thing, unless they do the tracking. And you might think about, when you're in the critique group, if you don't want to physically write your feedback on the pages, which I'm an old dog. I love to do that. I love to take it from here to my heart to the page. You know, I just do. I just do. But you can use that tracking system, and then you can email the tracking system, which one of the gals does that. The young gal, of course, does that. The rest of us old dogs, we like to write it out and mail the stuff back or scan it. But think about that, because the tracking does work, and it works really well, and it makes it more convenient. But I like to, I like to sit outside in a quiet place when I can and read the pages and carry them around with me. And so it's up to you how you want to do it. But it works both ways. It's just whatever you're comfortable with. So, you know, that's something you could set up in your guidelines too, that your critique group would have both options. Because eventually that's what the editor's going to do. So it might be good for you to get used to seeing things on a tracking system before you end up seeing your whole manuscript on a tracking system if you've never seen that before. That's kind of daunting in the beginning. But trust me, if I could do it, you can do it. I guarantee you. I think that's it. Now, Jane or Toby or Kathleen, you want to jump in with any other announcements?
I do have one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
I do have one thing to say. The newsletter deadline is March 15th, so that's about 2 weeks away from now. What I really need is some Arizona landscape photos, and they could be either JPEG or GIF or PNG, either one. If you will tell me where you took the photo and that you have the rights to the photo. And if you could send those to me at fairland@yahoo.com, the address is in the chat, FAERLAND. I would really appreciate it, and they would probably get into the next newsletter or one of the newsletters, future newsletters, and your name would be on it. Of course, you'd get the credit for the photo, but I could use some more Arizona landscape photos. So, and make sure to get your, and that goes for, you don't have to be a member to submit a photo and get your name on there. You do have to be a member to submit an article or something like that, but a photo, I'll take from anyone. I'm desperate. I've used Wikimedia enough, and I want some extra photos. So if you have those, I'd appreciate it.
Well, I will send you some photos, because during the during the pandemic, my husband and I have done our Sunday drives, and we've been to almost all the state parks, national parks. And,
oh, great.
Yeah, so I have lots of cacti and flowers and
Oh, fantastic,
yeah, yeah. Or wherever we could go and hide from people and you know, in the early morning. And so I'll send you some for
Okay,
sure.
great, I'd certainly appreciate it.
You're welcome. Jane, do you have anything more on the contest?
Jane seems to be frozen up, so I'll just say, we've got both published and unpublished categories for the contest. July 1 deadline. You can go on the website and download the entry blank. That's arizonaauthors.com. And if you're not a member, I think a few are not, and you would like to become a member, you can join on the join button there. And I want to thank you all for your attendance and for your interest in Arizona authors. And especially, I want to thank Patricia for always being such a wonderful member and a wonderful contributor.
Welcome. Thank you.
I'm going to say goodbye.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And I put
Bye.
my email and my text in the chat. So if anybody wants to take a quick look at the chat and get in touch with me. And I've made a note on who wants the guidelines